They laughed at her as if she was invisible, as if her uniform erased her humanity. The irony was brutal. She was the one holding the keys to the door, yet in their eyes she would never belong inside. Wealth has a way of pretending to be nobility, and that night, the Kingsley family sat on their throne of crystal glasses and gold-plated cutlery, mocking the woman who kept their guests safe. Nia Carter stood at the marble entrance of the ballroom, her back straight, shoulders squared, the blue of her uniform crisp under the glittering lights of the chandeliers. She had been told countless times to smile more, to look less intimidating, to soften herself so guests would not feel uneasy passing through her inspection. But tonight she did not smile. Tonight her silence carried weight, a kind of quiet that made the laughter from across the hall sound shriller, emptier, as though it was covering up a fragile truth. The Kingsleys were untouchable, billionaires whose empires stretched across continents, owners of the very glass towers that defined the skyline of the city. And yet, for all their wealth, they remained chained to an ugliness far older than money. Every word they threw across the polished floor was soaked in disdain. "She watches us like she's guarding a palace," sneered Victoria Kingsley, the eldest daughter, her champagne flute dangling between manicured fingers. "Except she's not a queen. She's just staff." The table erupted in shallow laughter, a chorus rehearsed too many times before. Nia heard it all. She always did. The uniform was meant to strip her of identity, but she was no stranger to being reduced to less than her name, her history, her worth. She stared past them, eyes fixed on the guests entering, her heartbeat steady but her throat tight. But then came the remark that pierced deeper. "Imagine if she ever tried to sit among us," drawled Charles Kingsley Jr., the golden-haired son whose arrogance was almost as blinding as his Rolex. Can you picture it? The gatekeeper pretending she belongs at the table? He smirked, and the cruelty in his voice was so effortless it might have passed for charm if one didn't hear the venom beneath. The laughter rose again, bouncing off the chandeliers, echoing in the vast ballroom where music swelled but could not drown the sound. It was in that moment Nia's jaw clenched, the fire in her chest threatening to rise. She told herself to endure, as she always had. For her mother who worked double shifts in a hospital back in Atlanta. For her younger brother who looked up to her as a shield against the world. For the countless others who bore insults silently because speaking up had cost them their jobs, their safety, their chance at survival. Yet endurance has limits. As she shifted her weight, trying to steady herself, her eyes caught sight of someone in the crowd. Elena Marquez. Elena moved through the room like light cutting through fog, her long dark hair framing a face both delicate and fierce. She wore a dress of deep emerald green that clung to her with effortless grace, her every step measured yet alive, as though she carried her own music with her. But what struck Nia most was not her beauty, though it was undeniable. It was the look in Elena's eyes, a quiet storm of recognition. Elena knew. She always knew. Because Elena was not just another guest at the party. She was the reason Nia's heart raced when she allowed herself to feel. She was the secret that had lived in late-night phone calls, in stolen glances when no one else noticed, in letters that would never see the light of day. Their love was the kind whispered about in history, the kind condemned by those who feared what they could not control. Nia had told herself again and again that she could keep it hidden, that safety meant silence. But as the Kingsleys laughed, as they turned her existence into a spectacle of mockery, the weight of silence began to suffocate. Elena's gaze locked on hers, steady, unwavering, daring her to breathe. Nia exhaled. The ballroom doors closed behind the last of the guests, sealing the glittering prison of wealth and arrogance. Inside, the Kingsleys toasted their empire, their glasses clinking in rhythm with the music of their triumph. But as Nia took her first step toward them, the room seemed to shift, as though the chandeliers above trembled in anticipation. No one noticed her at first. Why would they? She was background, a shadow in uniform, a gatekeeper. But when she crossed the invisible boundary that separated staff from royalty, heads began to turn. The laughter faltered. The music continued but now sounded strangely out of place, a melody trapped between elegance and dread. Victoria's lips curled. Oh look, the help wants to join us. Charles Jr. raised an eyebrow, leaning back in his chair, amused. Careful, sweetheart. This table isn't for everyone. Nia's voice was steady, low, but it carried across the hall like a blade cutting through silk. You're right. It isn't for everyone. It's not for people who build empires on the backs of others, who laugh at the ones keeping the doors open for you. A murmur swept through the guests, whispers like sparks catching dry wood. For a moment, the Kingsleys were silent. Then Charles Jr. chuckled, shaking his head. Bold. I'll give you that. But you'll regret this. Before Nia could respond, Elena stepped forward. Her emerald dress caught the light, her presence commanding in a way that silenced even the whispers. She reached Nia's side, her hand brushing against hers, not quite holding, but close enough to draw breath from the crowd. This is the woman I love, Elena said, her voice strong, her accent wrapping around each word like fire. And if you mock her, you mock me. Gasps tore through the ballroom. A ripple of shock spread across the golden table. Some guests covered their mouths. Others leaned forward in fascination. The Kingsleys froze. The air thickened with disbelief. Victoria spat the word like poison. Love. Elena's chin lifted higher. Yes, love. The kind you'll never understand because all you know is power and fear. The moment stretched, fragile yet unstoppable. Nia could feel her heart pounding, every beat louder than the orchestra still trying to play as though nothing had shattered. Charles Jr. A smirk returned, colder now. You think anyone here will believe you? You think love will protect you from reality? You're nothing. Both of you. Nia's eyes burned, but not with shame, with fire. She took Elena's hand fully, intertwining their fingers for the world to see. The gasp this time was louder, sharper, cutting through the music like thunder. And then she spoke words that would undo everything. You wanted a contract worth $7 billion. You won't get it, because I was the one guarding more than just this door. I was guarding the choice of who to trust with it. And I will never give it to you. Chaos erupted. The orchestra stopped. Guests shot to their feet. Voices collided, rising into a storm of disbelief and outrage. The Kingsleys paled, their empire trembling in a way no market crash had ever managed. And in the center of it all, Nia stood hand in hand with Elena, the chandeliers above raining light upon them like a crown not of gold, but of truth. The silence that followed the uproar was not silence at a lit, was a dense, trembling pause filled with the shifting of gowns, the scraping of chairs, and the sharp intake of breaths that could not quite steady themselves. The Kingsleys had been untouchable for decades. Their name was stamped on skyscrapers, whispered in boardrooms, inked into contracts that reshaped nations. And now, with a few sentences spoken by a woman in uniform, their invincibility had cracked. Do you even realize what you're saying? Barked William Kingsley, the patriarch himself, his voice booming with the arrogance of a man who had never once been told no. His silver hair gleamed under the chandeliers, his diamond-studded cufflinks flashing like weapons. You think you can walk into my ballroom, disrupt my family, and destroy a contract that could feed nations? You? A gatekeeper. Nia didn't flinch. Her hand tightened around Elena's, drawing strength not from defiance but from truth. You've already destroyed more than you know. You don't feed nations. You drain them, and you mock the very people who keep your empire standing. The room buzzed with disbelief. Some of the guests, high-profile investors and politicians, glanced nervously between the two women and the Kingsley patriarch. For them, this was no longer just scandal, it was danger. $7 billion meant alliances, power, futures. To watch it slip was to watch the ground beneath their feet give way. Victoria Kingsley slammed her glass down so hard it shattered, shards scattering across the polished oak table. You think anyone cares about your little love story? You're a spectacle, nothing more. When this is over, you'll be forgotten, and we'll still be Kingsleys. Elena stepped forward, her voice cutting like a blade. You think love is little? Then you've never felt it. You've never stood in the fire for someone else. That's why your empire will crumble. It has no soul. The ballroom doors burst open suddenly, and the chief financial officer of the Kingsley Empire hurried in, his face pale. He whispered urgently into William's ear. William's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing. "What is it?" demanded Charles Jr., annoyed at being left out. The CFO hesitated before speaking aloud, but the tremor in his voice betrayed the weight of his words. "The investors are pulling back. News is already spreading. Social feeds are live-streaming the incident." Gasps rippled again. Phones appeared in hands, cameras flickering to life. The night had slipped from the Kingsleys' control. William turned his glare on Nia. "You think this is your victory? You've destroyed yourself. No one defies this family and walks away unscathed." Nia's lips parted, but Elena spoke first. "We already walked through fire long before this night. Racism. Silence. Shame you think we haven't bled before we stood here? Whatever you try to do to us now will only prove what you are." The orchestra musicians began packing up their instruments, eyes avoiding the confrontation. Some guests excused themselves hastily, unwilling to be caught in the storm. But others stayed, drawn like moths to the spectacle, their own prejudices wrestling with the undeniable courage unfolding before them. Nia's mother's voice echoed in her memory, words she'd spoken when Nia was just a child. "There will come a day when silence will no longer protect you. When it comes, speak so loud they can never silence you again." Tonight was that day. She straightened, her voice steady as she spoke to the entire room. "You can laugh at me, you can call me less, but remember this, power built on cruelty will always collapse. Tonight you see the cracks forming. One day, those cracks will tear your empire apart." A hush fell over the crowd. The chandeliers flickered, as if agreeing. Charles Jr. rose from his seat, anger flashing in his eyes. "You don't get to preach to us. You're nobody." Elena lifted her chin, her hand still entwined with Nia's. "Then why do you look so afraid?" The words landed like a slap. Charles faltered for the first time, his smirk fading. The ballroom had shifted. No longer was it their kingdom. It was a battlefield, and the Kingsleys were losing ground. A voice rose from the crowd, unexpected, trembling yet strong. An older woman in pearls, a longtime business partner of the Kingsleys, spoke. "She's right. This family has mocked too many for too long. Maybe it's time someone said no." Another voice chimed in, then another. The whispers grew into a murmur of dissent, spreading like wildfire. William slammed his fist on the table. "Enough! You will not tear us down in our own home." But the truth was already out, and it was louder than his rage. Nia and Elena turned to leave, hand in hand, their steps slow but unbroken. Behind them, chaos erupted, fully guests arguing, investors demanding answers, the Kingsleys shouting to be heard. The night had begun with laughter at her expense. It ended with the sound of an empire cracking. Outside, the cool night air hit Nia's face like a blessing. She drew in a breath, deep and shaking, feeling the weight of what had just happened. Elena pressed closer, her hand still gripping hers as if refusing to let go even for a moment. "You did it," Elena whispered. Nia shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. "We did it. Together." For the first time that night, Nia allowed herself to smile. Not the practiced polite curve of lips she wore for guests, but a real one, raw and alive. The stars above seemed brighter, freer, as though they too had waited for this moment. But freedom was never without cost. And as the night stretched ahead, Nia knew the battle was only beginning. The Kingsleys would not forgive, nor would they forget. The question now was how far their vengeance would reach. Yet in Elena's eyes, she saw something stronger than fear. Hope. Hope that love could outlast empires. Hope that truth, once spoken, could not be buried again. They walked into the night together, their steps uncertain but their hearts unshaken. And somewhere, deep inside the glittering ballroom they left behind, the sound of cracks spreading grew louder. The following morning, the world woke to headlines that set the internet ablaze. Kingsley Empire shaken by $7 billion scandal. Gatekeeper defies billionaire family, declares love in ballroom showdown. Videos from phones had gone viral, shared across continents within hours. Some clips showed Nia's calm defiance, others captured Elena's declaration of love, and all of them painted the Kingsleys not as untouchable icons but as arrogant tyrants humiliated in their own kingdom. Support poured in from unexpected places. Messages flooded social media, many from those who had long suffered in silence under similar cruelty. Hashtags trended worldwide. Protesters gathered outside Kingsley headquarters with signs that read, "Love is power," and "Empires fall, truth stands." But not all responses were kind. Hate surged, too racist slurs, threats, accusations of fabricating the story for attention. The world was split, as it always was, between those who stood for change and those who clung to the old ways. Nia read some of the comments, her chest tight, until Elena gently took the phone from her hands. "Don't let their poison in," she said softly. "You already know the truth. That's enough." But Nia shook her head. "It's not enough. We lit a fire last night. Now we have to decide if we'll keep it burning." Elena's eyes glistened. "Then we keep it burning. Together." Nia thought of her family back in Atlanta, of her brother who had once begged her to teach him how to stand tall when kids at school mocked his skin. She thought of every time she had been told to bow her head, to endure. And she thought of the Kingsleys, their empire shaking but still standing, still dangerous. "Yes," she whispered. "Together." The days that followed were a storm. Reporters camped outside their apartment. Friends they hadn't spoken to in years suddenly called. Strangers sent letters, some filled with gratitude, others with venom. Nia's employer suspended her, claiming she had crossed professional boundaries, though everyone knew it was the Kingsleys' influence pushing the decision. But she was no longer afraid of losing a job. She had already walked away from fear. Instead, she and Elena began speaking publicly at rallies, in interviews, in community gatherings. They told their story not for fame but for every voice silenced in boardrooms, on factory floors, in schools where difference was mocked. Each time they spoke, Nia felt the weight of silence lifting from her chest, replaced by something fierce and unshakable. And always, Elena stood by her side, her hand steady in hers. Yet shadows loomed. Anonymous threats arrived in their mailbox. A car followed them one night, headlights glaring too close until they turned sharply and lost it. The Kingsleys had not forgotten. Their empire still had teeth. But love gave them armor. One evening, as they prepared to attend a televised debate on corporate accountability, Elena turned to Nia, her expression both tender and fierce. "No matter what happens, remember this: you are not alone anymore. You never will be." Nia touched her cheek, her heart aching with gratitude. "And neither will you." The cameras flashed, the microphones crowded, and the world leaned in to listen. The fire was burning. The studio lights were hotter than fire, and for a moment Nia felt as though the glare of the world itself had narrowed onto her. Cameras lined the stage, red dots blinking like watchful eyes. The debate was set on a wide semicircular platform, journalists in the audience, industry leaders in the front row. At the center stood Nia and Elena, their hands linked beneath the table where they sat. On the other side sat Charles Kingsley Jr., sharp suit, sharper smirk. His family had decided to send him as their representative, the golden boy who was supposed to charm the world back into their pockets. Behind him loomed his father, William, though he would not speak tonight. He didn't need to. His presence was reminder enough of the empire that still lived. The moderator adjusted his glasses and spoke. "Tonight, we address the controversy surrounding the Kingsley family, their business practices, and the explosive revelation from the gala. On one side, Charles Kingsley Jr., heir to the Kingsley Empire. On the other, Nia Carter, former Kingsley employee, joined by her partner, Elena Marquez. Let us begin." Nia's palms were damp, but Elena's steady hand anchored her. She lifted her chin. She was not here to survive. She was here to speak. Charles leaned back, flashing his practiced smile. "First, let me correct the narrative. My family has given billions to charities, created hundreds of thousands of jobs, and built infrastructure that defines modern cities. This notion that we are villains is laughable. What happened at the gala was a moment of misunderstanding, twisted by social media vultures. The audience murmured. Nia leaned toward the microphone. Misunderstanding? You mocked me because of the color of my skin. You mocked us for loving each other. That wasn't a slip of the tongue, Mr. Kingsley. That was who you are when you think no one can hold you accountable. A ripple moved through the room. Journalists scribbled. Cameras zoomed closer. Charles chuckled, spreading his hands. Look, I don't deny words were exchanged. But love? Race? These are distractions. Business isn't about feelings. It's about results. And we deliver results that no one else can. Elena's voice rang, clear and sharp. Results built on exploitation. On silencing people like Nia. On dehumanizing anyone who doesn't fit your perfect picture. If that is success, then it's nothing but rot wrapped in gold. For the first time, Charles's smile flickered. The moderator interjected. Ms. Carter, some argue you sabotaged a deal worth billions. Money that could have created opportunity for thousands. How do you respond? Nia's heart pounded. She leaned forward, her voice steady. You think $7 billion would save lives? That money would never have reached the people who needed it. It would have lined the pockets of those already drowning in wealth. I refused because I saw the truth. Power without humanity is poison. The room went still. Charles snapped. You're naive. You don't understand how the world works. Without families like mine, there is no progress. Nia's jaw tightened. Without people like me, there is no progress. Without the workers, the gatekeepers, the overlooked and underestimated, your empire collapses. You stand on our backs, and then dare to call yourselves giants. The audience erupted, some applauding, others gasping. Social feeds lit up in real time, hashtags exploding again. William Kingsley's face darkened in the shadows, but he remained silent, his eyes burning holes into Nia. The debate spiraled from there, every word a weapon. Charles grew angrier, defensive, his charm cracking. Nia grew bolder, her voice carrying not just her truth, but the weight of countless others unseen. Elena's interjections were fire, sharp and undeniable, calling out hypocrisy with eloquence that left Charles stumbling. By the end, the moderator looked almost dazed. Tonight, the world has witnessed more than a debate. We've witnessed a reckoning. When they left the studio, the night air was thick with noise. Crowds had gathered outside, cheering their names, holding signs of support. Cameras flashed endlessly. Nia squeezed Elena's hand, overwhelmed. She had never imagined her life could be so visible, so loud, so fragile. Through the crowd, a young black boy pushed forward, maybe 12 years old, eyes wide with awe. He handed Nia a crumpled piece of paper. She unfolded it. A drawing of a woman in uniform holding hands with another woman in a shining green dress. Beneath it, scrawled in shaky letters, "You made me brave." Nia's throat tightened. She knelt down, looking into the boy's eyes. "Thank you. You're already brave." The boy beamed, then disappeared back into the crowd. For the first time in years, Nia felt the weight of silence fully lift from her shoulders. But the Kingsleys were not done. 3 nights later, their lawyer held a press conference, announcing a lawsuit against Nia and Elena for defamation, breach of confidentiality, and intentional sabotage of corporate agreements. The damages demanded $500 million. The move was ruthless but predictable. It was how empires defended themselves with money, intimidation, and endless courtrooms. Elena threw the newspaper down, her voice trembling with rage. "They'll drag us through hell. They don't care if they win. They just want to break us." Nia placed her hand over Elena's. "Then we won't break. Not now. Not ever." Their supporters rallied. Civil rights organizations offered legal help. Former employees of the Kingsleys began stepping forward with their own stories of racism, abuse, and harassment. Whispers that had lingered in the dark for years now found light. The lawsuit that was meant to silence Nia instead cracked the dam. But with the flood came danger. One evening, As Nia walked home from a late meeting with lawyers, she noticed the street too quiet. A shadow moved behind her. Then another. She quickened her pace. "Going somewhere, sweetheart?" A voice drawled. Two men stepped from the alley, faces half-hidden, movements deliberate. Nia's heart thudded, but she forced her voice steady. "If you think fear will stop me, you're wasting your time." One of the men smirked. "Message from the Kingsleys. Stay quiet, or things get worse." Before Nia could respond, headlights flashed down the street. Elena's car screeched to a halt, her door flying open. "Get in!" she shouted. Nia bolted, diving into the passenger seat. The men cursed, retreating into the shadows as Elena sped away. For a long moment, the only sound was the roar of the engine. Nia's hands shook. Elena reached across, gripping her hand tightly. "They won't stop us. They can't." Nia exhaled, voice raw. "Then we have to fight louder." Days turned into weeks. The lawsuit loomed, court dates announced. The media frenzy never died, each new revelation feeding the fire. The Kingsleys poured millions into discrediting Nia, painting her as a bitter employee seeking revenge. But each attempt backfired as more voices rose, more evidence surfaced, more cracks widened. And through it all, Nia and Elena stood together. Their love was no longer hidden. It was no longer whispered. It was a banner held high in the storm, a reminder that dignity was stronger than cruelty. But still, the question lingered. Could love and truth truly withstand the weight of an empire? The answer was waiting in the courtroom. The courthouse steps were a battlefield that morning. Protesters lined the sidewalks, some chanting in support, others spewing venomous words. Police formed barriers. Reporters shoved microphones forward. Inside, the air was thick with tension. The Kingsleys sat in polished rows, their legal team and army in tailored suits. Across from them sat Nia and Elena, flanked by civil rights lawyers who had taken up their cause. The judge entered, the room rising, then settling. Proceedings began. The Kingsleys' lawyers attacked first, their voices dripping with condescension. They painted Nia as unstable, unprofessional, a woman with a chip on her shoulder who had fabricated insults to justify a reckless act of sabotage. They called her love story a distraction, irrelevant to business. But when it was Nia's turn, she rose slowly, her heart pounding. She took the stand, her eyes sweeping the courtroom. She thought of her mother, her brother, the boy who had given her the drawing. She thought of Elena, watching from the front row, her gaze steady as always. And then she spoke. "I am here because silence has never saved us. I am here because power without compassion is dangerous. I was mocked not because I failed in my job, but because of who I am, because I am black, because I dared to love openly. I rejected a contract not out of spite, but because I would not sell dignity for dollars. And I will never apologize for that." The courtroom buzzed. The judge banged his gavel for silence, but the impact had already been made. When Elena took the stand, she spoke not of contracts or wealth but of love. She told the story of late nights and whispered promises, of fear and courage, of the moment in the ballroom when she could no longer remain silent. Her voice cracked, but her truth rang clear. By the time she stepped down, even some jurors seemed moved. The trial stretched on, each day a storm. The Kingsleys fought with money and venom. Nia and Elena fought with truth and love. And as the world watched, the question of who would prevail hung heavy in the air. The trial dragged on for weeks, each day testing the limits of Nia's endurance. Every morning she walked into the courtroom under a storm of cameras. Her face splashed across headlines, her words dissected on talk shows. Elena was always at her side, her hand a constant anchor, her gaze a steady reminder that even when the world tried to shatter them, they were unbreakable together. The Kingsleys fought viciously. Their lawyers brought in witnesses who twisted stories, executives who lied with straight faces, and experts who painted Nia as reckless and unprofessional. They mocked her background, implied she was ungrateful for the opportunity to work for a family of influence. They tried to reduce Elena to a distraction, insisting that her presence clouded judgment. But every venomous blow revealed more of their cruelty. And in contrast, every word Nia spoke from the stand carried the weight of truth. She recounted years of silence, of watching others shrink under ridicule. She described the humiliation of that night at the gala, the way their laughter had cut deeper than any blade. And then she described the moment Elena had taken her hand, the moment truth became louder than fear. The courtroom listened, spellbound. On the final day, as closing arguments ended, the jury retired. The silence that followed was suffocating. Hours dragged. Nia sat with Elena, their fingers intertwined, both refusing to let go. Reporters hovered outside like vultures, eager for the verdict that would ripple across the world. When the jury returned, the air grew so heavy it seemed to press against everyone's chest. The foreman stood, holding the paper that would decide futures. In the matter of Kingsley Corporation versus Nia Carter and Elena Marquez, we find the pause stretched unbearable. For the defendants. The words struck like thunder. Gasps filled the room. Some applauded, others shouted in outrage, but it didn't matter. The verdict was clear. The Kingsleys had lost. Nia's breath collapsed in her chest. She turned to Elena, tears streaming unchecked. Elena pulled her into her arms, whispering, "We did it. You did it." Cameras flashed wildly, capturing their embrace, their victory, their love. William Kingsley rose from his seat, his face carved with fury, veins visible at his temple. He pointed at Nia, voice venomous. "This isn't over. You've humiliated my family, but empires don't fall with one verdict. You'll see." But his voice no longer carried power, carried desperation. For the first time, the world saw not a titan, but a man stripped of the illusion of invincibility. The judge banged the gavel. "Order. This court is adjourned." The sound of wood striking echoed like the collapse of an empire. Outside the courthouse, the crowd roared. Supporters cheered their names, held signs that read "Love wins" and "Truth over gold." Strangers cried openly, some rushing forward just to touch Nia's hand, to thank her for speaking what so many had been too afraid to say. Nia stood on the steps, Elena at her side, microphones thrust in her face. For once, she did not shrink from them. She raised her voice. "This victory is not just mine. It belongs to everyone who has been mocked for the color of their skin, for who they love, for daring to exist where the powerful say we don't belong." The Kingsleys thought they could buy silence, but silence is broken. And once broken, it cannot be rebuilt. The crowd erupted in cheers. Elena kissed her then, in front of the world, unashamed, fearless. The kiss was not just lovey, it was defiance. It was healing. It was hope. The image spread across the globe within hours, appearing on the front page of newspapers, on news broadcasts, on the phones of children who had never before seen themselves reflected so boldly. Weeks passed. The lawsuit was over, but the fight continued in other ways. The Kingsleys' empire began to crumble, not with an explosion, but with a slow, relentless unraveling. Investors withdrew. Governments launched investigations. Employees, emboldened by Nia's courage, stepped forward with their own testimonies of abuse. Skyscrapers that once bore the Kingsley name had banners draped across them, "Justice for Workers." Stock prices fell. Board members resigned. What had seemed eternal now cracked, brick by brick, truth dismantling the illusion. And through it all, Nia and Elena built something new. They founded a foundation for marginalized workers, a place where voices silenced in corporations could finally be heard. They traveled, spoke at universities, inspired communities. Nia's uniform no longer defined her, her words did. Her courage did. Elena became both her partner in life and in mission, her speeches weaving fire into every gathering, reminding the world that love itself was an act of resistance. But they also carved out space for themselves, away from the roar. Quiet nights in their small apartment, where Elena would cook arroz con pollo and Nia would laugh at her stubborn refusal to measure spices. Long walks under the stars, where they talked not about empires or lawsuits, but about dreams, children, books they wanted to write, places they wanted to see. Their love was not a spectacle. It was life, ordinary and extraordinary at once. One evening, nearly a year after the verdict, Nia returned to the ballroom where it all began. The chandeliers still hung, though dimmer now, the marble floors scuffed, the grandeur faded. The Kingsleys no longer owned it. Bankruptcy had forced them to sell. She walked slowly, Elena beside her, the memories rushing back, the laughter, the humiliation, the fire that had burned in her chest. This place used to feel like a prison, Nia murmured. Elena squeezed her hand. Now it's just a room. It doesn't own us anymore. They stood in silence, and Nia realized Elena was right. The ballroom was no longer a stage for cruelty. It was simply space, hollow without the weight of arrogance. What mattered was not the walls, but what had risen inside her that night, the refusal to bow, the courage to love openly. Nia turned to Elena, smiling softly. You know, if I could go back, I wouldn't change a thing. Not one word, not one choice. Elena leaned her forehead against hers. Neither would I. They kissed again, not for cameras this time, but for themselves, sealing the journey that had carried them from shadows to light. Months later, Nia visited her family in Atlanta. Her younger brother, now a teenager, greeted her at the airport with arms thrown around her neck. He wore a t-shirt with her face on it, the viral image of her hand clasped in Elena's under the chandeliers. Everyone at school knows you, he said proudly. They call you a hero. Nia laughed through tears. I'm no hero. I'm just me. Her mother, older now but still fierce, hugged her tightly. You spoke, baby. That's all I ever wanted, for you to speak. At the dinner table, surrounded by family, Elena by her side, Nia felt something she hadn't in years. Peace. Not every battle was won. Racism still lived. Homophobia still thrived. The Kingsleys, though diminished, still lurked in the shadows of influence. The world was far from perfect, but cracks had formed. Truth had been spoken. Love had been seen. And sometimes that was enough to keep hope alive. On a quiet night back in their city, Nia and Elena sat on the roof of their building, looking out at the skyline. Lights flickered in the distance. The towers that once seemed untouchable, now reminders of impermanence. Elena rested her head on Nia's shoulder. Do you ever wonder what's next? Nia smiled faintly. Whatever it is, we'll face it together. The wind carried their laughter into the night. Somewhere below, a child drew pictures of two women holding hands. Somewhere else, a worker decided to speak out for the first time. Somewhere, someone who had felt small all their life now felt seen. And in the quiet between stars and skyscrapers, Nia knew this truth. Empires fall, but love endures. The world would keep fighting, but so would they. And in that endless struggle, there was beauty, there was strength, there was hope. Hope that someday no one would ever again be mocked for the color of their skin, for who they loved, for daring to sit at any table. Hope that someday the chandeliers would shine not on cruelty, but on justice. Hope that someday silence would no longer be survival, because every voice would already be free. Until then, Nia and Elena held hands, unafraid, their love a lighthouse in the storm. And the world kept listening. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.